It was meant to be the most joyful day of my life. My engagement party was flawless, exactly as I had envisioned. The ballroom was brimming with New York's finest, and the crystal chandeliers cast a gentle light over the lively crowd. I was surrounded by friends, family, and the man I cherished beyond words, Daniel. He was a billionaire, sure, but more than that, he was the man I imagined growing old with. Everything was perfect, until it wasn't. I was laughing with a friend when I saw Daniel across the room, standing with my sister, Emily. They were smiling and speaking in low tones. At first, I thought nothing of it. Why would I? Emily had always shown a hint of jealousy toward my life, but I never imagined she'd cross a line. I trusted her, and I trusted Daniel. But then, Emily rose to her feet and tapped her glass, the sound slicing through the lively chatter in the room. "I have an announcement," she said, her voice barely trembling. Enough to sound authentic. I smiled, expecting her to share something exciting from her own life, but instead, she dropped a bomb that shattered mine. "I'm pregnant, and it's Daniel's child." The room plunged into stunned silence. I stood motionless, my heart hammering in my chest as I looked at Daniel, hoping for a denial, anything to make sense of this nightmare, but his face was filled with guilt, and in that instant, I realized my sister had taken a wrecking ball to my life in a way I never saw coming. Thinking back, my life with Daniel felt like a fantasy. We had met at one of those high-society Manhattan events where champagne flows endlessly, and everyone is dressed to perfection. I hadn't expected much from the night, just another round of small talk and networking. Then I saw him, Daniel, tall, striking, effortlessly commanding the room. He was deep in conversation with a few CEOs. But when our eyes met from across the room, it was as if time slowed. He excused himself from his group and walked directly toward me. I can still feel the thrill of that moment, the way my heart raced as he introduced himself with that unforgettable, charming smile. From that night, everything happened quickly. Daniel swept me off my feet in ways I hadn't anticipated. Our first date, dinner at a Michelin star restaurant, followed by a breathtaking helicopter tour over the city. I was taken aback, not just by the luxury, but by Daniel himself. He wasn't like the other men in his world, fixated solely on their wealth and status. Daniel was considerate, thoughtful, and remarkably grounded. I fell for him deeply, and his wealth and power became mere background. What truly mattered was the way he looked at me, making me feel like I was the most important person in the room. Naturally, my family was delighted, especially my younger sister, Emily, who had always admired me. She was thrilled for me, and I was glad to share my happiness with her. Daniel included her effortlessly, treating her like family from the beginning. Whether at dinners or on trips, he made sure she felt welcomed. But as time went on and my relationship with Daniel grew, I began noticing subtle changes in Emily. At first, it was small and harmless, or so I thought. She'd casually comment on how lucky I was or joke about how perfect my life seemed. She'd even quip about finding a man like Daniel for herself. I laughed it off, not realizing how much her words meant. When Daniel proposed, she was the first person I called. Her excitement was palpable over the phone, her voice full of joy as she told me how much I deserved this happiness. But when I saw her a few days later, I noticed something different. Her smile seemed forced, not quite reaching her eyes. I brushed it off, convinced I was imagining things. She was my sister. My best friend, of course. She'd be happy for me, right? In the months leading up to the engagement party, the cracks in our bond became harder to ignore. Emily spent more and more time with Daniel, under the pretense of helping with the event planning. She insisted it was all for me, to make the day perfect. But something felt off. Occasionally, I'd catch them laughing together or deep in conversation. I assured myself it was nothing. Daniel was practically family to her by now, and I trusted them both implicitly. Looking back, I see all the signs, the way Emily's compliments turned to envy, her initial excitement dimming into something darker. But at the time, I was so swept up in my happiness, too preoccupied with planning a wedding with the man I loved, to see what was right in front of me. Now, I can see the moments I should have questioned, the times I should have demanded answers. But I was too wrapped up in my ideal world, too trusting, too naive to consider that my own sister could betray me so completely. The night was meant to be ours. The rooftop sparkled with fairy lights, and the New York City skyline set a magical, perfect scene. Friends, family, and some of the city's most powerful gathered around me, celebrating my engagement to Daniel, the man I believed I'd spend forever with. Emily, my sister, had been by my side all evening, smiling brightly, Her arm intertwined with mine as we greeted guests. There was no reason for suspicion, no hint that behind her radiant smile lay a betrayal I never saw coming. After hours of champagne and endless congratulations, Emily rose, glass in hand. I thought she was about to give a toast, maybe share a funny story from our childhood, something lighthearted to honor the night, but her voice faltered, and she glanced at Daniel nervously. "I have an announcement," she said, her voice trembling just enough to sound earnest. Then she placed a hand on her stomach, a gesture that made my heart plummet before she even spoke the words, "I'm pregnant, and it's Daniel's baby." For a split second, the world stood still, all the laughter, music, and clinking glasses faded to silence as reality shattered around me. I felt as though I were submerged underwater, her words, "pregnant, Daniel's baby," echoing in my mind. This couldn't be happening. I turned to Daniel, searching his face for denial, hoping he'd laugh, dismiss it as some insane mistake, but he only stood there, pale and frozen, guilt evident in his expression. The ground felt as if it disappeared beneath me. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, their whispers and gasps cutting into me. "Is this true?" I demanded, my voice shaking with a mix of fury and disbelief. "Tell me she's lying." Daniel opened his mouth, but no words emerged. He couldn't even meet my gaze, staring down instead, his hands trembling. "Say something," I shouted, my voice piercing the tense silence of the rooftop. I felt my chest tighten, panic creeping in. Finally, he muttered, It was a mistake, it only happened once. Emily, his voice trailed off, barely audible over the ringing in my ears, but it was enough." The betrayal echoed louder than anything he could say. As if on cue, Emily's face crumpled into a display of regret. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whimpered, looking down as though she were ashamed, playing the victim to perfection. "I never wanted this. I'm so embarrassed." In that instant, the two people I trusted most, the man I was going to marry and my sister, had torn my world apart. "I never wanted to hurt you." Emily's voice was soft and pitiful, and I could feel the sympathy of the crowd shifting toward her. Despite the fact that she was the one who had shattered my life, people murmured, their pitying eyes now directed at her as if she were the true victim. I was the one whose world had just crumbled, yet I found myself sidelined by their sympathy. I wanted to scream, to cry, to lash out at her for stealing everything from me and then using it to her advantage, but I was paralyzed, unable to move or even breathe. I felt trapped, suffocating in a sea of onlookers, each of them witnessing my devastation yet oblivious to the fact that I was the one left standing in the ruins. I had never felt so alone, so humiliated. As I watched Emily cradle her stomach with one hand and wipe her tears with the other, I realized that the life I thought I had was gone. Everything I knew, everything I had trusted, was reduced to rubble in a single moment. After the engagement party, the world I had known began to crumble around me. I spent days holed up in the luxurious apartment Daniel and I had shared in Manhattan, immobilized by the shock and incomprehension of this betrayal. The space that had once felt like my haven now suffocated me. Each corner, every piece of furniture, reminded me of the life we were supposed to be building together, a life that vanished in an instant. The events of that night replayed over and over in my mind. Emily's voice, her announcement, the pitiful way she played the victim, and Daniel's silence, guilt-ridden and weak. He hadn't defended me, hadn't denied her words. He just stood there, watching as my world collapsed. I was angry, yes. But more than anything, I was heartbroken. How could I have been so blind? How did I not see what was unfolding right in front of me? I began to question everything, my relationship with Daniel, my bond with Emily. I had entrusted them with my heart, my life, and they had shattered it. Had I ever truly known either of them, or had I been fooling myself all along? For days, I remained secluded in the apartment, ignoring the vibrant city beyond my windows, as if it belonged to another universe. My phone buzzed incessantly with calls, messages, friends, family, even Daniel, but I couldn't bear to face any of them. What would I say? That I had been betrayed by the two people I loved most, that my sister was carrying my fiancé's child. Emily, meanwhile, wasted no time. While I drowned in grief, she was out there, spinning her story for anyone willing to listen. By the time I finally checked my phone, the story had already been rewritten. Emily had told everyone how deeply sorry she was, how much this whole situation had crushed her, and how none of it was what she wanted. She cast herself as the innocent victim, and somehow, People bought into it, even my own family, my flesh and blood, began to see me as if I was the unreasonable one, as if I should have been more patient, more forgiving. After all, Emily was pregnant. Shouldn't I have shown more compassion? Shouldn't I have tried to patch things up instead of breaking down? The judgment from those around me hung over me like a suffocating fog. Daniel's friends, who once embraced me openly, now kept their distance, as if I'd become someone volatile, someone they didn't want to associate with. Even people we both knew started turning away, as if I had somehow become the villain of my own life. And Daniel, he reached out, calling, texting, even stopping by the apartment once. But I couldn't bring myself to face him. He left a voicemail, fumbling with his words, saying he regretted everything, that he felt trapped by Emily's pregnancy but still cared for me. The phrase made my stomach churn. If he truly cared, he wouldn't have betrayed me. His guilt, his regret, none of it mattered. It didn't undo what he'd done. I had to leave that apartment. Every corner of it felt like a haunting reminder of him, of them. So, I packed up and left. Each box felt like it weighed a ton, filled with fragments of a life I no longer recognized. The apartment that had once been my home now felt tainted, foreign, smeared with lies. I moved into a smaller place just a few blocks away. It wasn't as fancy, but it was mine, a fresh start, or at least, that's what I tried to tell myself. But the reality was, I couldn't shake the thought of how they had torn my life apart. Not just Emily and Daniel, but everyone who should have supported me. They'd all turned away, swayed by Emily's manipulation and Daniel's wealth. Sitting alone in that unfamiliar new apartment, I realized that I couldn't let this be the end. I couldn't let them win. Emily had taken everything from me, and Daniel had let her, but I wasn't going to fade quietly into the background. If they thought I'd just disappear, they were wrong. I started to think, to plan, to strategize. I didn't know exactly how, but one thing was certain. I wasn't about to let them walk away unscathed. Emily wanted to play the part of the innocent victim, and Daniel wanted to act as if he'd been caught up in an unavoidable mess. Fine, let them, but I wasn't going down quietly. I had lost my relationship, my trust, and even my family, but I still had my dignity, and I would make sure they'd remember that. Looking back, I'd always felt something was off. Emily's dramatic announcement at the engagement party, Daniel's guilty silence, it all seemed strange. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became that Emily's story had gaps. The timeline didn't quite align, and there were too many details that didn't add up. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something, and I was determined to find out exactly what. That's when I decided to hire a private investigator. I needed the truth, and I knew Emily wouldn't reveal it willingly. I handed over everything I knew, then waited. After a few days, the call finally came, and my instincts were confirmed. Emily had never been pregnant, not once. It was all an elaborate lie, a manipulative scheme to lure Daniel away from me. The investigator had found medical records showing she'd never seen a doctor, never had prenatal care. She'd fabricated the entire thing. I felt a wave of anger and disbelief. I wanted to be shocked, but deep down, I wasn't. This was who Emily was: jealous, desperate, willing to destroy anyone who threatened her goals, even her own sister. With this truth in hand, I felt a surge of adrenaline. It was time for a confrontation. I invited Daniel to my apartment that evening. He came in looking uneasy, clearly sensing that something was off. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice uncertain. I didn't waste any time. I placed the folder on the table between us, watching his eyes flicker toward it. "It's about Emily and the baby," I said. His face went pale, and he took a small step back. "What do you mean?" he stammered, his voice laden with guilt. "Read it," I replied, keeping my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. "Read it, and you'll understand everything." Daniel hesitated before reaching for the folder. His hands shook as he opened it, and I watched his expression change from confusion to disbelief, and finally, to horror. This can't be true," he whispered, flipping through the documents, grappling with the realization. "She said she was pregnant." "She lied," I said coldly, savoring the satisfaction that built up as I watched the truth dawn on his face. "There was never a baby, Daniel. Emily fabricated the entire thing. She manipulated you, and all of us." He dropped the folder on the table, his hands covering his face as he slumped into the chair. "I can't believe this. How could she? How could I have been so blind?" I crossed my arms, anger welling up again. Because you wanted to believe her, you chose her over me, you allowed her to tear us apart. He shook his head, his voice breaking. I didn't know. I thought she was telling the truth. I stood there, silent, letting his words sink in, but I didn't feel sympathy for him. Not anymore. He had made his choice when he trusted Emily without question, allowing her lies to come between us. Now he had to live with the fallout, but it wasn't over yet. I had also called Emily. I wanted her to see the devastation she'd caused and to confront the truth head-on. When Emily arrived, there was still a smugness in her expression. She thought she had one, but the moment she stepped inside and saw the open folder on the table, her confidence faded. "What's going on?" she asked. Her voice trembling, I stepped forward, locking eyes with her. "The truth is out, Emily, you've been lying from the beginning. There was no baby, you faked it all." Her face went pale, her mouth opening and closing as she searched for words. "That's not true," she shouted, trying to regain control. I lost the baby. It was a miscarriage." I shook my head, stepping closer, refusing to let her distort the truth. "Stop, Emily, just stop. I've seen the records, you were never pregnant. And we both know it." In that moment, her facade crumbled, her shoulders slumped, and her eyes filled with tears. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. I just wanted what you had." Her confession came out in broken fragments. "I've always been jealous of you," she said, her voice trembling. "You had everything, Daniel, the perfect life. I was tired of living in your shadow. I thought if I had him, if I had a child, I could finally live the life I deserved." Standing there, I listened to her feeble justifications, feeling nothing but a chilling satisfaction. She had wrecked my relationship and torn our family apart, all because of her envy and selfishness. Now, with her lies exposed for all to witness, Daniel, who had been silent until then, finally spoke. "Emily, how could you do this?" His voice was thick with disgust, his hands trembling as he looked at her. "You lied to everyone. You destroyed everything." Tears ran down Emily's face as she sank to her knees, sobbing. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I just wanted to be happy." I stared at her, feeling no sympathy, no remorse. "You didn't just want happiness, you wanted to take everything from me." There was nothing left to say. Emily had made her own bed, and I had no intention of rescuing her. Daniel turned to me, his face a mix of regret and horror, but I no longer cared. The damage was done. Watching them unravel, I felt an unexpected sense of relief. Emily's deception had collapsed, and I was free from her web of manipulation. This time, I could walk away without looking back. The days that followed were like observing the aftermath of a catastrophe, with everything and everyone in ruins. Emily's carefully constructed lies had spectacularly imploded, shredding the fragile bonds of our family. What had once been a close, loving family unit had turned into a minefield of hushed conversations, accusatory glances, and fractured trust. Emily, once the cherished youngest sister, was now a pariah. Those who once adored her and believed her every word now regarded her with disdain. She tried to justify herself, to explain her choices, but no one listened. My parents, our relatives, even her friends, everyone had distanced themselves, and I felt no pity for her anymore. Of course, she tried to apologize. She appeared at my apartment one morning, her eyes swollen from crying, hands shaking as she knocked on my door. "Please," she whispered as I opened it, her voice breaking, "just let me explain." For a moment, I felt a flicker of the sisterly bond we'd once shared, but it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by memories of her deceit, manipulation, and betrayal. She had taken everything from me, my fiancé, my family's trust, even my sense of security. There was no going back. "I'm sorry, Emily," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I don't care anymore. You made your choices, and now you have to face them." Her face crumpled in response, but I didn't let it get to me. I shut the door in her face, closing off the part of my life that had once been tangled in her lies. Daniel wasn't much better. Despite everything, he still had the audacity to try and win me back. He sent flowers, called incessantly, and left lengthy, guilt-ridden voicemails, desperate to explain himself. In his mind, he was also a victim, caught up in Emily's lies and claiming he had no control over the situation, but I wasn't buying it. One night, I finally answered his call. His voice was soft, pleading, almost desperate. "I was wrong," he said. "I was wrong to believe her. You have to understand." "I thought." "You thought what?" I snapped, cutting him off. that I'd just accept your betrayal, that I'd somehow understand because you felt trapped. The anger I'd bottled up for weeks came pouring out. You chose her, Daniel, you believed her lies without a second thought, you didn't defend me or protect us. There was a long silence, and when he spoke again, his voice was filled with regret. I made a mistake, I know that now. I'll spend my life making it up to you if you give me a chance, but it was too late. I had spent far too long living under the shadow of others' lies. I wouldn't go back to that. I deserve better than you, I said firmly. And I won't waste another second with someone who didn't see my worth when it mattered. The line went silent, the weight of my words hanging between us. He tried to say something else, but I hung up before he could finish. Word traveled fast in Daniel's circles. In high society, there was no room for scandal, and soon enough, his name became the subject of gossip, whispered about at elegant dinner parties. The man who once seemed untouchable now had a tainted reputation. People no longer trusted him as they once did. His business deals were scrutinized, his integrity questioned. For someone like Daniel, that was the ultimate downfall. And as for Emily, she was left with nothing, no relationship, no family support, and no friends willing to stay by her side. Shunned by those who once adored her, she was utterly alone. In the end, all her manipulations had left her empty-handed and isolated. Meanwhile, I was finally free. For the first time in what seemed like forever. I wasn't entangled in anyone else's lies or weighed down by someone else's drama. I'd spent so long navigating the toxic connections that had dominated my life, my dysfunctional bond with Emily, my dependency on Daniel's affection, but now, I was liberated from it all. Liberation felt different from what I'd imagined. It wasn't a grand, cinematic moment, it was quieter, almost peaceful. There was no surge of victory. No loud celebration, just me, standing in the center of my life, finally realizing I held control over my happiness, and that was the sweetest revenge of all. In the quiet of my apartment, after the storm had passed, I was left alone with my thoughts. Emily's web of lies had unraveled, and Daniel was out of my life, yet a lingering anger remained, embedded deep within me. Forgiveness seemed impossible. How could I forgive someone who had so ruthlessly torn my life apart? But holding on to that anger felt equally toxic. I had spent weeks imagining ways to make Emily suffer, to ensure she felt the same pain she had inflicted on me. I had dreamed of revenge, of watching her crumble under the weight of her own deceit, and in some ways, I had achieved that. Emily was shunned by our family, abandoned by friends, she had lost everything. I had witnessed her fall with a cold satisfaction. But now that everything had settled, I realized the anger wasn't dissipating. It was festering, clinging to me like an unnecessary weight. Did I want to live the rest of my life defined by the pain she had caused, consumed by the betrayal? The answer was no. Revenge had its moment. It gave me a brief sense of justice, a fleeting satisfaction, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't bringing me the peace I had hoped for. Instead, it was anchoring me to the past, tethering me to the very people who had harmed me. I had tried to put the past behind me. Yet memories of Emily kept surfacing, of the love we once shared, the closeness that defined us, but I couldn't overlook how much she had destroyed in her attempt to take what I had. Forgiving her felt impossible, maybe even forever out of reach, but I knew I couldn't let her actions shape my future. I wanted to be someone free from bitterness and resentment, not someone weighed down by it. I had a choice. I could hold on to my anger, or I could release it. While forgiveness wasn't something I could offer yet, I was ready to move forward. As for Daniel, there was nothing left to discuss. He'd shown me his true nature the moment he accepted Emily's lies without hesitation. Any remorse he might feel now was his burden to bear, not mine. He belonged to my past, along with Emily, and I intended to leave them there. Breathing deeply, I felt a weight lift from my chest for the first time in weeks. This wasn't about forgiving Emily or seeking revenge on Daniel. It was about me, reclaiming control of my life and stepping away from the ruin they had left behind. With one last look out the window, I moved into a new chapter, feeling stronger, more self-sufficient, and no longer defined by betrayal. Months went by, and life slowly returned to normal. After everything, I had finally refocused on myself, my career, my happiness. It wasn't an easy path, but day by day, I felt lighter. The bitterness that once consumed me faded, replaced by a quiet sense of purpose. My business flourished, and for the first time in a long while, I felt truly free, free from Emily, free from Daniel, free from the shadows of betrayal. I had rebuilt my life, piece by piece, and I was proud of it. One afternoon, while reviewing plans for a new project in my office, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me pause. "I've changed. I miss you. Can we talk?" It was Emily. I stared at the message for a long moment, feeling an unusual mix of emotions. Part of me wasn't surprised. Emily had always found ways to slip back into my life when things didn't go her way. She had always found ways to stir up trouble, yet a part of me wondered, had she really changed? Maybe those months alone had prompted her to reflect, to grow. After all, people can change, right? Before I could respond, another message arrived. This time from an old friend I hadn't spoken to in ages. "Thought you should know, Emily's back to her old tricks. She's seeing a guy. Same story. Be careful." My heart sank. I reread the message, the words hitting hard. It was as if history was repeating itself. Emily was once again manipulating her way into someone's life, probably someone with money. Nothing had changed. I set my phone down, feeling the weight of the decision before me. I had two paths. I could expose her, like I had before. Warn this man or his family about the web Emily was weaving. It would be so easy, and there was a tempting satisfaction in the thought of bringing her down again, but would it truly change anything? Or I could simply walk away. I had freed myself from her lies once. Did I want to get tangled in them again? The silence in the room thickened as I considered my options. Exposing her might feel good briefly, but it would drag me back into a mess I had worked so hard to escape. I had my own life now, my own peace, and finally, I was happy. In that moment, I realized Emily's choices and consequences were no longer my responsibility. I picked up my phone and typed a single word in reply to her message, "No." Then, I put the phone down, stood up, and left my office, determined to leave the past behind me once and for all.